It's a joy to be here with you all, and wonderful to see so many people willing to give up so much time to this, well, what I think is really important topic and process for the Church of England. I'm going to give you in hopefully a relatively short time, just give you a quick overview of living in love and faith, just in case you're not quite as familiar with the process and the resources as others, so that we're all sort of on the same page. And then much of the rest of the day will be about getting a taste of what participating in engaging with the Living in Love and Faith resources might look like. But first of all, just a quick introduction to Living in Love and Faith. And thankfully, Andrew and Giles have already helped us in their conversation about some of these aspects. So in this introduction, I'd like to say just a few words about why the Church of England has embarked on this in the first place. Then give you a quick tour of the resources in case you haven't yet had a chance to explore them. And then talk about the all-important question which Andrew and Giles touched on and Bishop Pete touched on, was how we have those conversations. And then towards the end of the day, you'll have opportunities to think about how to take this forward and when that will be. So beginning with why, you've already heard from Giles and Andrew that the Church has been looking at these questions for decades and have produced many reports and guidances and all sorts. And of course, the last thing that they did before Living in Love and Faith was to embark on the shared conversations. And that took place over several years, and it may be that some of you were already involved in those shared conversations. On the back of those, when they were completed, the House of Bishops wrote a report and thought that as a formality, they'd take that to General Synod in February 2017, requesting Synod to take note. Well, albeit by a small margin, Synod chose not even to take note. And that came as a bit of a shock, actually. It was as if it was one too many runnings into the sand, as I think Giles described them. And so it was at that point that the archbishops and then the bishops really realized that the Church needs to take a whole new approach to these questions. This whole new approach was given the catchy title of Episcopal Teaching Document. And when a group of 40 or so people were gathered with their different lived experiences, convictions, and expertise, one of the first things they did was change the name. And so Living in Love and Faith was born, Christian teaching and learning about identity, sexuality, relationships, and marriage, which is actually a really accurate description of what Living in Love and Faith is all about. So what was going to be distinctive about this? What was going to be different that would somehow improve on other attempts? Well, as I think it was Andrew already mentioned, it was really importantly about setting what had become very focused questions about which we disagree into the much bigger context of our understanding of what does it mean to be human what does it mean for us as Christians to understand the fact that we're created in the image of God, ransomed, healed, restored, forgiven. So what is our understanding of being human? And a really important consequence of that is that this isn't about a particular group of people, it's about every single one of us. And also, we have quite a lot of depth of learning to do about this subject at all levels. And it's learning that not only does perhaps a small group of bishops need to do, but it was really emphasized that it's learning that the whole church needs to do together. So if these are the distinctives, then how were they embedded in the resources? As I said, 40 or so people were involved in producing the resources together. And here are some of the sort of hallmarks which shaped the resources. So first of all, of course, it was about making sure that all the resources were an invitation for, as you engage with them, to enter a learning journey. It's about learning together, not about receiving some teaching from on high, but exploring together these questions. But secondly, if it's about being human, then clearly, while we reach for the Bible as Christians for our deepest truth about what it means to be human, other disciplines also, the sciences, the biological and social sciences, history, and so on, also reveal truth about our understanding of being human. And so we need to explore those as well, and how they connect with our biblical, our Christian understanding of these things. If it's about being human, then we must never, ever lose sight of the fact that it is about all of our stories. It's about who we are. And so we must make sure that in all our learning together, we never uproot ourselves from the reality of our lived experiences and the lived experiences of people around us. And finally, of course, we have disagreements about certain questions. We have a lot in common, which I hope is one of the things people will discover as they engage with the resources. But yes, we have disagreements. And it was the absolute intention of that very diverse group to present these different perspectives as fairly, as positively, and as thoroughly as possible, so that we can explore the roots of our differences in some depth. Whether we achieved that or not is up to you to judge, but that is the intention. There was no intention to somehow sway the resources in one direction or another. So what are the resources? Giles and Andrew mentioned a number of them already, but let me give you a rundown of the full suite of resources. I guess at the heart of the resources is indeed the Living in Love and Faith book. And it is a substantial book running to over 400 pages, but it's also quite colorful and quite accessible. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And there are the podcasts that were mentioned, and the podcasts relate to particular chapters in the book and sort of take them further in conversation among people who contributed to the book having been written entirely collaboratively with no single author. But of course, if we're going to engage the whole church in this learning process, a lot of people won't be reading a 400-page book. And so we've produced the course, both in video form and in booklet form. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And the story films that have already been spoken about, 16 of them available. And these story films hopefully help us to encounter perhaps people we might not otherwise have encountered, but also to remember the human aspect of these questions. Behind all of that, there's a large online library of over 300 resources, some of them essays and papers written by members of the Living Love and Faith group specifically for the project, but others are books, scholarly articles, autobiographies that enable you to explore further particular topics perhaps, or particular perspectives. And they're all available on the Living in Love and Faith hub freely. You access that through the Church of England website /LLF, and you're invited to register on the hub in order to begin exploring those resources for yourself. I just want to say a few words about the book and the course because they are quite central to the resources. It was just over a year ago, back in March last year, when the House of Bishops met for the last time physically. And it was at that meeting that we, I think, brought pretty much the last draft, maybe the 15th or 16th draft of the book. And the bishops unanimously agreed to commend these resources to the church. And that's why the book begins and ends with words from the bishops, words of invitation, exhortation even, for all of us to engage in this learning together. And an appeal to do what is actually quite radical in the Church of England, and that is to contribute to the church's discernment about the way forward as we learn and engage with the resources together. But the rest of the book takes you on a learning journey, which you can choose to enter at different points. But it begins with thinking about what is it that the church has received in terms of our understanding of the gift of life, the gift of relationships, the gift of sex, the gift of marriage. It then takes a look outwards at society and looks at what's going on. In our society, a lot is going on in relationship to identity, gender, sexuality, relationships and marriage, but also what's going on in the biological sciences, what's going on in other faith communities. Having done that, then part 3, which is really sort of at the heart of the book, it's trying to make those connections between where we are in 21st century England regarding these questions and where we are in God's stories told in scripture. And so making those connections and perhaps gaining new insights as we make those connections in relation to these subjects. But as Andrew mentioned, somehow about particular questions, while we're all seeking to listen and to hear God, we come to different conclusions. And how is that? And so part 4 explores the roots of our differences so that we have a deeper understanding, perhaps even of our own perspectives as well as those of others. And so there's a large section, of course, on how we hear God through scripture. But of course, we hear God through the natural world, through culture, through prayer, through our consciences, and so on. And the 5th part is a little bit like the podcast's conversations between people who contributed to the book and take some of the topics further. But really importantly, if you think of this book as a journey, a learning journey, then it's interrupted at each part, causing us to pause as we read the short vignettes of people's lived experience stories, people who I've met and whose stories I recorded and who then have been written up anonymously in the book. And again, they might be people you wouldn't perhaps have met before, and really important reminder of how deeply personal and profound impact that some of these questions have on our lives. The course, of course, is going to be probably one of the main ways that most people will engage with the resources. And it is unashamedly and importantly a course for people to do together in small groups. That's an important part of the vision of living in love and faith, to do this together, and ideally, if at all possible, to do it together across our different convictions and lived experiences. It too has 5 parts, but it's organized quite differently from the book, much more thematically, beginning by thinking about what does it mean as disciples of Christ, as learners, to talk about and learn about these things. It then thinks about the 3 main topics of identity, relationships, and sex, before inviting people to reflect on how then do we understand our life together as a church with all our diversity and difference. Each of the components, each of the sessions of the course has a number of different components. They begin with a reflection on a pastoral principle, about which I'll say a bit more in a moment. And then they have 2 teaching sessions, and these teaching sessions are distillations of what's in the book. And you can imagine how agonizing it was for the group to try and distill 400 pages into short teaching sessions. And that's why I really hope that you, as leaders and teachers of the faith in the church, will also engage with the book, which has greater depth and nuance. And there's a Bible study, of course, and all of those are inviting people to discuss and learn together, and importantly, to pray together and to reflect on what new insights perhaps they're gaining through that experience of learning together. And importantly, the Living in Love and Faith video version of the course, which we hope people will engage with, has story films embedded within it. But these questions of identity, sexuality, relationships, and marriage are profoundly personal. And we may have all sorts of different experiences in relation to them and convictions. And so how we do this is of perhaps as much importance as what we engage with. So we want across the church to create spaces for learning together well. One of the ways that we've described this is that we want these spaces to be places where we can do this learning in a way that is braver and safer than we have done before. There is no question that the church has not been good at this. We have damaged people, we have hurt people, we have even pushed people away, as we have already heard. And so we need to do this better. Why braver? Well, learning is about encountering new perspectives, new horizons, often new understandings. It stretches us, it changes us. And so to embark on learning is to be prepared to be open and to be prepared to be transformed in some way. And that takes courage. And it's so therefore we do need a certain amount of courage and bravery to engage together with this. But absolutely, we can't even begin to be brave if we can't be safe enough. Safe enough to ask questions, safe enough to share our stories and our convictions without the fear of being judged or rejected or having other views imposed upon us. This is absolutely vital, and we need to do this well. And that's why we've prepared a number of resources to help us together to do this well. Some time ago, I think it was last year, might have been before then, the church produced pastoral principles. And these are about the kinds of obstacles that each of us puts into the way of engaging with others who are different from us, or even of engaging with learning together. The obstacles of prejudice, oppressive silence, ignorance, fear, hypocrisy, and misuse of power. And that's why those introduce each of the sessions in the course. But the course also invites people, participants, to make some commitments about how we engage with one another, how we listen to and speak with one another. And those are on the back of the front cover of the booklet, as well as in the films. And there are lots of resources for leaders, notes for each of the sessions and for the course generally. And there is some quite detailed and very specific guidance about how we make these spaces braver and safer, very specifically in relation to questions of sexuality, gender, and identity. And they spell out some of the boundaries of behavior that can sometimes transgress those boundaries of acceptability, and how we can learn from those and learn to manage those in a way that minimizes damage and hurt. And we are providing training for facilitators. Should you want to feel more confident about leading a group, we're providing short courses of training. So living in love and faith, it is about learning. It is about all of us learning. There is new depths to explore together. But it's about doing that learning more bravely and more safely than we have done before as a church. So therefore, we need to do that together. We need to learn to listen more attentively to each other, but above all, of course, to God. And so amazingly, this is about an invitation for you to contribute to the church's discernment of what is it that the Spirit is saying to the church today. Yes, about identity, sexuality, relationships and marriage, but who knows what other insights God might be speaking to us as we engage with these questions together.